Every morning, my wife and I felt sick. Nausea, dizziness, brain fog, for months. Doctors found nothing. Until the priest came, looked at the vase our daughter-in-law had given us, and sharply said, "Throw it out immediately." When we looked inside, our blood ran cold. This sweet daughter-in-law was slowly bringing us to our end, but we survived, and now her nightmare is only beginning.
Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now.
My name is Harold Coleman. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in Austin, Texas for most of my life. Spent 35 years building a chain of auto repair shops across the state. 6 locations at our peak, stretching from Houston to San Antonio. Sold the business 4 years ago, figured it was time to enjoy retirement. Now I spend my days in the garage, restoring a 1967 Ford Mustang. Cherry red, original V8 engine, the kind of car that makes grown men weep. She's been my project for 4 years now, and Virginia jokes that I treat that car better than I treat her. She's wrong, of course. Nothing in this world compares to my Virginia. We met 44 years ago at a dance hall downtown. I was 24, thought I knew everything about life. Then she walked in wearing a blue dress, and suddenly I didn't know a single thing, except that I needed to talk to her. She was a nursing student back then, sharp as a tack and twice as beautiful. I asked her to dance 3 times before she said yes. When she finally did, she told me she wanted to see if I was persistent or just annoying. Turns out I was both, and she married me anyway. Virginia worked at St. David's Medical Center for 35 years. Now she spends her retirement growing roses and baking apple pies that make the whole neighborhood jealous. We built a good life together in our home on Ridgewood Lane in Westlake Hills. 4 bedrooms, a big backyard with her rose garden and my workshop. We do have grandchildren, actually. Chris and little Em, 12 and 10 years old. They're from Marcus's first marriage, before Megan passed away in that terrible accident 7 years ago. The kids live with Megan's mother now, but we see them on weekends. Those 2 are the brightest spots in our lives these days. Our son Marcus was the light of our lives, too. I say was, not because he's gone, but because somewhere along the way, we lost the boy we raised. He used to run to the door when I came home from work, covered in grease and exhausted, and he'd hug me anyway. He was kind, thoughtful, the sort of kid who'd give his lunch to a classmate who forgot theirs. After Megan died, we thought he might never recover, but he did, slowly. And then he met Tiffany Snyder. Virginia noticed it first. She always sees through people. "There's something cold behind her smile," she told me after the first dinner. I brushed it off. Tiffany was beautiful, charming, worked as a real estate agent. She laughed at my jokes, complimented Virginia's cooking. What wasn't to like? Everything, as it turned out. The change in Marcus was gradual but undeniable. He stopped calling as often. Visits became shorter. When they did come over, Tiffany would make little comments about our dated furniture, about how the house was too big for just 2 people, about how property values in Westlake Hills had really exploded lately. Marcus would sit there, silent, staring at his plate like a man who'd forgotten how to speak. 8 months ago, they asked to move in with us. Marcus had some trouble at work, Tiffany explained with that perfect smile of hers. They needed to get back on their feet. Just temporary, she assured us. What kind of parents would we be if we said no to our own son? Virginia squeezed my hand that night in bed. "I don't like this, Harold. Something feels wrong." "Their family," I said. "We'll make it work." I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life. I've never been more wrong than that night. The first few weeks were tolerable. Tiffany kept to herself mostly, always on her phone talking about big deals that never seemed to close. Marcus worked from home for his IT company, barely leaving their room. But I started noticing things. The way Tiffany looked at Virginia when she thought no one was watching, like she was appraising an item for sale. The way Marcus flinched when his wife spoke, like a dog expecting to be kicked. The way they both seemed to be waiting for something. Then the sickness started. It began about 6 months ago, maybe a week after Tiffany gave us a decorative vase as a thank you gift for letting them stay. Mornings became difficult. I'd wake up with a headache that wouldn't quit, a churning in my stomach that made breakfast unbearable. Virginia had it worse. nausea, dizziness, a fog that wouldn't lift until noon. "We're getting old," I told her, trying to laugh it off. "Bodies falling apart. Happens to the best of us." But Virginia didn't laugh. She just looked at me with those eyes that have seen 1,000 patients, eyes that know when something isn't right. We went to doctors, blood tests, scans, the whole routine. Everything came back clean. "Perhaps you should rest more," they said. "Stress can manifest physically at your age. Maybe try some relaxation techniques." I wanted to believe them. It was easier than the alternative. One morning, about 3 weeks ago, I came downstairs to find Virginia gripping the kitchen counter, her knuckles white, her face the color of old paper. She was trying to steady herself, and for a terrible moment, I thought she was going to collapse, right there on the tile floor. "Virginia!" I rushed to her, held her up. Her body felt fragile in my arms, lighter than it should have been. When had she lost so much weight? She looked up at me, and I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. In 44 years, I'd seen Virginia face down difficult patients, family crises, my own stubbornness. I'd seen her hold a dying woman's hand without flinching and deliver bad news to families with grace. I'd never seen her afraid, not once. "Harold," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "something is wrong. This isn't just getting old." I held her tighter, feeling her heart racing against my chest. Across the room, that decorative vase sat on the dining table, its painted surface gleaming innocently in the morning light.
When Harold caught me that morning, I saw something shift in his eyes. He wanted to believe we were simply aging, that our bodies were betraying us the way bodies do. But I've been a nurse for 35 years. I know the difference between natural decline and something else entirely. The symptoms didn't make sense. That's what kept me awake at night, running through possibilities like flipping through a medical textbook. Nausea, headaches, fatigue. Individually, they could mean anything. Together appearing only in the mornings, only subsiding by afternoon. That was a pattern. And patterns always have causes. I started keeping notes. Harold doesn't know this, but I filled half a notebook with observations. The mornings we felt worst were always the ones we ate breakfast at home in our dining room. When we went out, to the diner on Congress Avenue to visit my sister in San Antonio, we felt fine. The symptoms would disappear entirely. Then we'd come home and it would start again. I noticed something else too. Tiffany never ate breakfast with us. She'd sweep through the kitchen, grab a coffee and disappear. Always too busy, always running late for showings that never resulted in sales. 3 days before I nearly fainted, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I came downstairs earlier than usual, moving quietly because my head was already pounding. Tiffany was in the dining room, her back to me. She was adjusting that vase, the one she'd given us, the one with the painted flowers and the silver rim. She picked it up, moved it closer to our seats at the table, then stepped back to examine her work. There was something deliberate about the way she did it, something careful. She must have sensed me because she turned around, and for just a moment before her mask slipped back into place, I saw something ugly in her eyes. Satisfaction. Anticipation. "Oh, Virginia, you startled me." Her smile was perfect, practiced. I was just tidying up. The vase looked crooked. "Of course, dear," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It looks lovely there." But nothing about this felt lovely. That night, after Harold helped me to bed, after the dizziness finally faded, I lay in the darkness and thought about the son I'd raised. Marcus used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard, fistfuls of dandelions that he insisted were special flowers because they made wishes come true. He used to crawl into bed with us during thunderstorms, convinced that monsters couldn't get him if he was between his parents. I thought about Chris and little Em too, our grandchildren. They lost their mother Megan 7 years ago. Now they might lose their grandparents too. The thought of never seeing them grow up filled me with a fury I didn't know I possessed. "Harold," I said into the darkness, "are you awake?" "Can't sleep either." I reached for his hand, found it warm and solid. "I need to tell you something. About the vase." He listened while I explained. My observations, the pattern of our sickness. what I'd seen Tiffany doing. I felt his body tense beside me, felt the moment when denial gave way to something harder. You think she's... He couldn't finish the sentence. I don't know what I think. But Harold, that vase, she gave it to us about a week after we started feeling sick, and when she moved it closer to our seats, I took a breath. I'm not imagining this. Harold was quiet for a long moment. I could almost hear him thinking, running through the same logic I had, hoping to find a hole in it. The vase, he said finally. She gave it to us right after they moved in, made a whole show of it, how she found it at an estate sale, thought of us immediately. And we started feeling sick about a week later. The silence that followed was heavy with implications neither of us wanted to speak aloud. Our daughter-in-law, our son's wife, living under our roof, sleeping down the hall. What do we do? Harold asked. His voice was rough, stripped of its usual humour. I don't know yet, but we can't go to the police with suspicions and a bad feeling. We need to be sure. I squeezed his hand. And if I'm right, Harold, if she's really doing what I think she's doing, then what? I thought about the girl Marcus had married, the charming smile, the calculating eyes, the way she looked at our home, worth over $800,000, like she was already measuring it for new furniture. Then we make sure she never hurts anyone again. The next morning, Harold's phone rang during breakfast, a breakfast I barely touched, sitting as far from that vase as I could manage. He answered, spoke for a few minutes, and when he hung up, his face had changed. That was Father Raymond Wilkins. Remember him? Used to work at Pfizer before he found his calling. He's passing through Austin, wants to stop by. I remembered Raymond well. He and Harold had been friends for decades, ever since Raymond's wife was a patient of mine. After she passed, he'd left his career as a pharmaceutical chemist and devoted himself to the church. When does he want to come? Tomorrow afternoon. Said he wanted to talk about matters of the soul and the body. Harold paused, looking at me with something new in his eyes. Virginia, Raymond spent 40 years working with chemicals, compounds. If anyone would know what might be in that vase. I felt a spark of hope, the first I'd felt in months. Call him back, I said. Tell him we'd love to see him. And Harold, don't mention any of this on the phone. My husband nodded, understanding without being told. If we were right about Tiffany, we couldn't risk her overhearing anything. Not yet. That night, I dreamed of dandelions and wishes. I woke with tears on my pillow and steel in my heart. Whatever was happening in this house, Harold and I would face it together. We weren't about to let anyone take our lives from us, not even family.
Father Raymond Wilkins arrived the next afternoon, just as the Texas sun was reaching its peak. I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, but he looked the same. Tall, silver-haired, with the kind of calm that comes from either deep faith or deep knowledge. In Raymond's case, it was both. 40 years as a pharmaceutical chemist at Pfizer, then 15 years serving the church after his wife passed. If anyone could identify what was making us sick, it was him. We sat on the back porch, away from the house, away from ears that might be listening. Virginia had made sweet tea, and Tiffany had conveniently decided to show a property the moment she heard we were having company. Marcus was locked in their room, as usual, doing whatever it is he does on that computer all day. I found myself wondering when my son had become a stranger who only emerged for meals. "You look tired, Harold," Raymond said, studying my face. "Both of you do. More than tired. You look depleted. That's what we wanted to talk to you about." I glanced at Virginia, who nodded. "We've been sick. Every morning for months. Doctors can't find anything wrong." Raymond listened as Virginia explained the pattern, the symptoms that appeared only at home, only in the mornings, only when we ate breakfast in the dining room. She told him about the vase, about watching Tiffany move it closer to our seats. By the time she finished, Raymond's expression had shifted from concerned to something I couldn't quite read. "Show me this vase," he said. We led him inside, moving quietly. The vase sat on the dining table, where it always did, its painted flowers cheerful and innocent. Raymond approached it slowly, bent down, and inhaled deeply near the opening. His face went pale. "Harold, Virginia, step back, please." His voice was calm, but there was an urgency underneath it. "Do you have a sealed container, a jar with a lid?" Virginia found a mason jar in the pantry. Raymond carefully reached into the vase and pulled out one of the decorative balls inside. Aromatic beads, Tiffany had called them, supposed to make the room smell nice. He dropped it into the jar and sealed it tight. "I need to take this with me," he said. "I have a friend at the university, a toxicologist. She owes me a favor." "Raymond, what is it?" Virginia's voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling. He looked at us both, and for a moment, the scientist in him overshadowed the priest. "I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But that smell, underneath the perfume, it's formaldehyde, mixed with something else I can't identify without proper equipment." He paused. "If I'm right, prolonged exposure could cause exactly the symptoms you're describing, and eventually, much worse." The world seemed to tilt. I reached for Virginia's hand. "How much worse?" I asked. Raymond's eyes met mine. "Liver damage, kidney failure, neurological problems." Another pause. "Given enough time, a year, maybe 2, it could be fatal." Virginia made a small sound. I pulled her close, feeling her shake against me. "Throw out the vase," Raymond continued. "Today. Get it out of your house. Don't let anyone touch it without gloves. I'll have results in 3 days." After he left, Virginia and I stood in the dining room, staring at that beautiful, deadly thing on our table. I thought about all those mornings, sitting right here, breathing in whatever poison was slowly destroying our bodies. The headaches, the nausea, the way Virginia had looked that morning when she nearly collapsed. "She's trying to kill us," Virginia whispered. "Our own daughter-in-law is trying to kill us. We don't know that for certain yet. Harold." She looked at me with those nurses' eyes, the ones that had seen death 100 times and knew its face. "You know, we both know." I did know. In my gut, in my bones, I knew. The charming smile, the calculating glances, the way she'd positioned that vase exactly where we'd breathe its poison every single morning. Every detail suddenly made sense. "What do we do?" I asked. For the first time in our marriage, I had no idea. Virginia was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her spine, and I saw the steel return to her eyes. "We wait for Raymond's results. If we're right, we don't go to the police. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because it would be our word against hers. A decorated vase with aromatic beads. She'd claim ignorance. Say she bought it at some market, had no idea it was dangerous." Virginia shook her head. "We need more. We need to understand why, and we need to protect ourselves." I stared at my wife, this woman I'd loved for 44 years. She'd always been smart, always been observant, but right now, watching her think 3 steps ahead of a woman who wanted us dead, I was seeing something new. "You have a plan," I said, "the beginning of one." She met my eyes. "But first we need to act like nothing has changed. We keep eating breakfast, away from that vase. We smile. We pretend." And then, Virginia's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "And then we find out exactly who Tiffany Snyder really is."
3 days. That's how long we waited for Raymond's call. 3 days of pretending everything was normal, while a potential weapon sat in a box in Harold's workshop, wrapped in plastic, waiting to reveal its secrets. We stopped eating breakfast in the dining room. I told Tiffany I wanted to start a new routine. Breakfast on the back porch, enjoying the morning air. She didn't question it, just shrugged and went back to her phone. The relief was almost immediate. Within 2 days, Harold's headaches faded. My nausea disappeared. The fog that had clouded my mind for months lifted like morning mist. That alone would have been enough to convince me. But I needed proof. We both did. Raymond called on the 3rd evening. Harold put him on speaker, and we huddled together in the garage, the door closed, the Mustang watching over us like a silent witness. "The results came back," Raymond said. His voice was heavy. "Virginia, Harold, I'm so sorry. The aromatic beads contained a cocktail of chemicals, low concentrations of formaldehyde, traces of benzene, and several other compounds I'd never heard of. Individually, each was below the threshold that would cause immediate harm. Together, released slowly at room temperature, they created a toxic environment that would accumulate in the body over time. The damage would be gradual, Raymond explained. Months of exposure would cause chronic symptoms, exactly what you've been experiencing. A year or more. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Can this be traced to her? Harold asked. Can we prove she knew what was in those beads? That's beyond my expertise. You'd need to involve law enforcement, forensic analysis. After we hung up, Harold and I sat in silence. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of traffic on Ridgewood Lane, the normal sounds of a normal neighbourhood where normal people weren't being slowly poisoned by their children's spouses. We have to tell someone, Harold said finally. The police? A lawyer? Not yet. I've been thinking about this for 3 days, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle. Harold, think about it. Tiffany is smart. She bought those beads somewhere, probably with cash. There's no receipt with her name on it. If we go to the police, she claims she had no idea they were toxic. Bought them at a flea market, a garage sale. Who could prove otherwise? So what do we do? Just wait for her to finish the job? No! I took his hands in mine. We need to understand her motive. Why would she want us dead? What does she gain? The answer was obvious, of course. Our house, our savings. Everything would go to Marcus, and Marcus was firmly under Tiffany's control. But there was something else bothering me. Something I'd noticed in the way Tiffany operated, the careful patience of her plan. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't desperation. This was calculated, methodical. This wasn't her first time. Harold, I said slowly, I want to hire someone, a private investigator, someone who can dig into Tiffany's past, her real past, not the stories she's told us. You think she's done this before? I think someone who poisons her in-laws for money doesn't wake up one day and decide to become a killer. There's a history here. I can feel it. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. How do we find someone trustworthy? Someone who won't tip her off? I've already made some calls. I pulled out my phone. Gerald Martinez. He's an attorney who specializes in estate law and family disputes. I worked with his mother at the hospital years ago. He's discreet, and he has connections. The next morning, while Tiffany was out and Marcus was locked in his room, Harold and I drove to Gerald's office downtown. He listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every word. You understand, he said when we finished, that what you're describing is attempted murder. If the evidence supports your claims, this is a criminal matter. We understand, I said, but we don't have enough evidence yet. We need to know who Tiffany really is before we can prove what she's done. Gerald studied us both. I know an investigator, Russell Chen, former federal agent, now private. He's expensive, but he's thorough. Russell Chen was everything Gerald promised, quiet, professional, utterly unremarkable in appearance, the kind of man you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him, which I suppose was exactly the point. We gave him everything we had, Tiffany's full name, her social security number that Marcus had mentioned once, her supposed background as a real estate agent. He took notes, asked clarifying questions, and quoted us a fee that made Harold wince. How long? Harold asked. A week, maybe 2. Depends on how deep the layers go. That night, Harold and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset over the Texas hills. Inside, Tiffany was laughing at something on her phone. Marcus was eating dinner alone in their room. The vase was gone, but the poison it had spread still lingered in our home. We're doing the right thing, Harold said. It wasn't a question. We're protecting ourselves. And we're protecting Chris and Em. I thought about our grandchildren, about the future they deserved. Harold reached for my hand. 44 years of marriage had taught us many things, but the most important was this. Whatever storm came, we were stronger together than apart. Somewhere in the house, Tiffany laughed again. She had no idea we were coming for her. She thought we were old, weak, easy targets. She was about to learn how wrong she was.
Russell Chen called 10 days later. His voice was flat, professional, but I could hear something underneath, the kind of controlled tension that comes with bad news. Mr. Coleman, I need to see you and your wife. Today, if possible. What I've found, you'll want to see this in person. Virginia and I drove to his office that afternoon. It was a small space above a print shop downtown, the kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. Russell was waiting for us with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. Before I show you this, he said, I want you to prepare yourselves. What I've uncovered goes deeper than anyone expected. He opened the folder, and my world shifted on its axis. Tiffany Snyder wasn't Tiffany Snyder at all. Her real name was Christina Walsh. She'd been married twice before, once in California, once in Nevada. Both marriages ended within 2 years. Both husbands had died. The first, a retired teacher named Robert Henley, suffered a heart attack 8 months into the marriage. Christina inherited $340,000 from his life insurance. The second, a small business owner named Daniel Vance, died from what doctors called unexplained organ failure after 14 months. She walked away with his house, his business, and another $275,000 in insurance. Neither death was investigated as suspicious at the time, Russell explained. Different states, different coroners, no obvious red flags. But when you put the pieces together, the pattern is undeniable. I felt Virginia's hand tighten on mine until her knuckles went white. There's more, Russell continued. I tracked down Robert Henley's sister. She's been trying to get someone to listen to her for years. She believes Christina poisoned her brother. Slow, gradual, just like what you've described. The doctors never tested for it because they had no reason to suspect anything. I stared at the photographs spread before me. Wedding photos where Tiffany smiled that same charming smile. Death certificates. Insurance claim forms. A timeline of carefully planned murders spanning nearly a decade. How did she avoid detection? Virginia asked, her voice steady despite the horror in her eyes. She moves, changes names, never stays in one place long enough to establish a pattern. By the time anyone starts asking questions, she's already someone else, somewhere else. Russell paused. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, if you hadn't gotten sick and started investigating, you'd be the third and fourth victims. That night, Virginia and I sat in my workshop, surrounded by the ticking of clocks I'd restored over the years. The sound that usually calmed me now felt like a countdown. We go to the police, I said. Tomorrow. We give them everything. Virginia nodded slowly, but I could see her mind working. We will. But Harold, think about it. We have circumstantial evidence, patterns, suspicions. What we don't have is proof that she poisoned us specifically. The beads in the vase. She'll claim she had no idea they were toxic. Bought them at some market, never read the ingredients. So what do? We need her to confess, or we need to catch her in the act. Virginia's eyes met mine. Russell says Texas is a one-party consent state. If one person in a conversation agrees to be recorded, it's completely legal. I understood immediately. Hidden cameras? In our own home? We own the house. It's perfectly legal. Virginia's voice was quiet but firm. She thinks we're dying slowly. She thinks we don't suspect anything. Let's use that. The next morning, while Tiffany was out showing a property that probably didn't exist, I called my old friend Bobby Parker, a security specialist who'd installed systems for all 6 of my auto shops over the years. Within 48 hours, we had cameras in every common area of the house. Small, wireless, invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. And then we waited. The first recording came 3 days later. Tiffany on her phone with someone we later identified as her mother, Patricia Walsh, living in Oregon. They're getting weaker, Tiffany said, her voice casual, like she was discussing the weather. The old man can barely eat breakfast anymore. I give it another 6 months, maybe less. Virginia and I watched the footage together in the darkness of my workshop, the Mustang's silent witness to our horror. The son's useless, Tiffany continued on screen. But once they're gone, everything goes to Marcus, and Marcus does whatever I tell him. A laugh that made my skin crawl. The house alone is worth over $800,000. Add in savings. We're looking at well over $1 million total. Then Marcus walked into the frame. Babe, are you sure they don't suspect anything? Tiffany rolled her eyes. Please, They're too old and too stupid. Your father thinks his headaches are from working on that car. Your mother thinks she's going through some late-life health thing. I paused the video. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. He knew, I whispered. Our son knew. Virginia was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Then he'll face consequences too.
The cameras became our silent witnesses, recording everything, while Harold and I continued to play our roles as the oblivious, dying elderly couple. Every day felt like a performance, smiling at Tiffany over breakfast, pretending to be weaker than we were, shuffling a little slower when she walked past. Acting had never been my strong suit, but desperation is a powerful teacher. But while we acted, we also planned. Every night, Harold and I would retreat to his workshop, watch the day's recordings, and refine our strategy. We were building a case brick by brick, recording by recording. A week after the first damning footage, I decided to do some investigating of my own. Marcus and Tiffany had gone to a weekend conference in San Antonio, another excuse to spend money they didn't have. The house was quiet. Their bedroom door was unlocked. I shouldn't have gone in. I did anyway. The documents were in a shoebox under the bed, hidden, but not well. Tiffany clearly didn't think we'd ever look. Why would we? We were dying after all. Inside, I found bank statements, credit card bills showing purchases of designer clothes and expensive dinners, and one piece of paper that made my blood freeze in my veins. A loan agreement. $120,000. Borrowed from a private lender at an interest rate that would make a loan shark wince. And there, in the collateral section, were 3 words that changed everything. Expected, family inheritance. They had borrowed money against our death. I photographed everything with my phone, careful to leave no trace that I'd been there. Then I put the documents back exactly as I'd found them, smoothing the carpet where my knees had pressed, adjusting the shoebox to the same angle it had been. That night, in Harold's workshop with the door locked and the Mustang watching over us, I showed him what I'd discovered. $120,000, he said, his voice hollow with disbelief. They borrowed $120,000 betting that we'd die. It gets worse. I scrolled to another photo on my phone. Look at the date. They took out this loan 3 months before Tiffany gave us that vase. This was planned from the very beginning, Harold. Every smile, every thank you, every moment she pretended to care about us. All of it was theatre. Harold sat heavily in his workshop chair, aging a decade in seconds. The half-restored Mustang gleamed behind him, patient and unfinished, waiting for the attention he'd been too sick to give it. "What do we do?" he asked. "We make sure they can't touch anything when this is over, and then we make them pay." The next morning, we met with Gerald Martinez and explained everything: the loan documents, the recordings, Russell's investigation into Tiffany's murderous past. Gerald's expression shifted from professional concern to cold fury as he reviewed each piece of evidence. "This is loan fraud," he said, spreading the photographs across his desk. "They claimed collateral they have no legal right to. Combined with the poisoning evidence, we have enough to destroy them completely." "First we protect ourselves," I said, "completely and permanently." Over the next week, Harold and I quietly dismantled everything Marcus and Tiffany had been counting on. We rewrote our wills. Every penny, every property now went into a trust for Chris and Em, our grandchildren from Marcus's first marriage. Marcus was excluded entirely, his name nowhere in the documents. The house was transferred into the trust as well, making it legally untouchable by creditors, lawsuits, or scheming daughters-in-law. Gerald handled the paperwork with meticulous precision. We signed everything in his office, witnessed and notarized, ironclad and unbreakable. But we weren't done yet. "There's one more thing," I told Harold that evening. The vase. We'd hidden the original in his workshop, wrapped in plastic, preserved as evidence. But Tiffany didn't know that. As far as she knew, it was still sitting on our dining table, slowly releasing poison into the air we breathed. She's going to check on it eventually, I said. And when she finds it empty or replaced. Harold smiled, cold and sharp, a smile I'd seen maybe 3 times in 44 years. She's going to add more poison, and we're going to record every second of it. We replaced the vase that night, filling it with harmless decorative beads from a craft store. To anyone looking, it was identical. Even the smell was similar, just harmless lavender instead of death. 3 days later, the cameras caught exactly what we'd predicted. 2 in the morning. Tiffany crept downstairs wearing silk pajamas that cost more than my grocery budget for a month. She had a small bag in her hand. She opened the vase, frowned at the contents, sniffed them suspiciously, then dumped in new beads, darker, more pungent than before. "Time to speed things up," she whispered to the empty room. "These old fools are taking too long to die." I watched her climb the stairs, return to bed beside my son, and close her eyes like she hadn't just tried to accelerate our murder. The next morning I showed Harold the footage. "She's escalating," I said. "We can't wait any longer. If she gets impatient enough, she might try something more direct." "Then it's time." Harold reached for the phone. "I'll call Detective Price." I put my hand over his. "Not yet. There's one more thing I want." "What?" I thought about 6 months of poison, 6 months of nausea and headaches and fear, 6 months of watching my husband suffer, while Tiffany smiled at us across the breakfast table, waiting for us to die. "I want to see her face," I said quietly, "when she realizes we won."
Detective Nancy Price was a 45-year-old veteran of the Austin Police Department. Sharp, thorough, and utterly unimpressed by excuses. Gerald Martinez had recommended her as someone who handled sensitive cases with discretion and precision. When Virginia and I walked into her office 2 days later with our evidence, I watched her expression shift from professional skepticism to something close to amazement. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said, spreading the documents across her desk. "You have toxicology reports confirming the presence of formaldehyde and benzene compounds in decorative items your daughter-in-law gave you. You have video recordings of her discussing your deaths, ordering additional toxic materials, and physically adding those materials to your home. You have documentation of loan fraud, where they claimed your estate as collateral. And you have a private investigator's report linking her to 2 previous deaths under similar circumstances." "That about covers it," I said. Detective Price sat back in her chair. "Mr. and Mrs. Coleman, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've never seen victims walk in with a case this comprehensive. We wanted to make sure there was no way she could talk her way out of it," Virginia said quietly. "She won't." Price began organizing the evidence into folders. "I'll need a few days to verify everything and coordinate with prosecutors, but based on what I'm seeing here, we're looking at multiple felony charges: attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, fraud." She paused. "Your son, Marcus, the recordings suggest he was aware of her plans." Virginia's hand found mine under the table. "Yes," she said. "He knew. Then he'll likely face charges as well. Conspiracy at minimum, possibly accessory to attempted murder depending on how involved he was." I felt something twist in my chest. My son, the boy who used to chase fireflies in the backyard. The man who'd sat there while his wife plotted our deaths. "We understand," I said. The next 3 days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with prosecutors, and careful coordination. Detective Price wanted to arrest Tiffany at our house, catch her off guard before she could destroy evidence or flee. The plan was simple. We'd invite them to a family dinner, and police would be waiting outside. Virginia prepared her famous pot roast, the same meal she'd made for Marcus's birthday every year since he was a child. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar, a bitter contrast to what was about to happen. Tiffany arrived first, sweeping into the dining room with that practiced smile. "Something smells amazing, Virginia. You really shouldn't have gone to all this trouble." "It's no trouble at all," Virginia replied, her voice perfectly calm. "Family is worth the effort." Marcus trailed behind, looking uncomfortable. He'd been jumpy lately, probably sensing that something had changed in the house's atmosphere. But he hadn't said anything. He never said anything. We sat down to dinner. Small talk flowed. Tiffany's fake real estate deals, Marcus's work, the weather. I let it go on for about 15 minutes, letting her relax, letting her think everything was normal. Then I set down my fork. "Tiffany," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "do you remember that vase you gave us? The one with the aromatic beads?" Her smile flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. "Of course. Why?" "We had it analyzed by a toxicologist." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Her fork clattered against her plate. Beside her, Marcus went rigid. "Formaldehyde," I continued, watching her mask crumble in real time. "Benzene, a few other compounds I can't pronounce. Funny thing about that combination, individually each one is just below dangerous levels. Together, though, they'd kill a person in about a year, maybe 2 if they were lucky. I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice had gone thin, reedy. "I bought those beads at a market. I had no idea." "We have recordings, Tiffany." Virginia's voice cut through her protests like a scalpel. "Recordings of you discussing our deaths with your mother. Recordings of you ordering more toxic compounds. Recordings of you adding them to the vase at 2 in the morning while you whispered about how we were taking too long to die." Tiffany's chair scraped back. Her eyes darted to the door. "I wouldn't," I said. "There are 6 police officers outside. They've been there for the past hour." As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Tiffany bolted anyway, ran for the back door like a rabbit from a fox. She made it about 3 steps before Detective Price stepped into the kitchen, badge in hand, 2 officers behind her. "Christina Walsh," Price said calmly, "you're under arrest for attempted murder in the 1st degree." Tiffany screamed. Not words, just a raw animal sound of fury and fear. The officers handcuffed her while she thrashed, while she cursed, while the charming mask finally shattered completely. Through it all, I watched Marcus. He sat frozen at the table, staring at his wife being dragged away, his face white as paper. When Tiffany screamed his name, begging him to help her, he didn't move. After they took her out, silence settled over the dining room. The pot roast sat cooling on the table. Virginia reached across and took my hand. Marcus finally looked at me. His eyes were wet, lost. "Dad, did you know?" I asked. My voice was cold, even to my own ears. "Did you know what was in that vase?" He opened his mouth, closed it. His gaze dropped to the table. That was answer enough. "Then you deserve everything that's coming," I said. "And Marcus, the officers aren't done yet. They have questions for you, too."
They arrested Marcus that same night. I watched from the kitchen window as they led him to a police car, his wrists cuffed behind his back. He looked back at the house once, at me, and I saw the little boy I'd raised, frightened and confused and looking for his mother to make it better. I didn't move, couldn't move. 44 years of motherhood warred with 6 months of betrayal, and neither side won. Harold came up behind me, put his hand on my shoulder. We stood there together, watching until the tail lights disappeared around the corner. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." The days that followed were chaos. Tiffany was held without bail, flight risk, Detective Price explained, given her history of moving between states and changing identities. Her lawyer, a fast-talking man named Bradley Quinn, immediately began trying to negotiate. Within a week, he was in Gerald Martinez's office proposing a deal. "My client is prepared to provide testimony against Marcus Coleman," Quinn said, his smile too polished to be genuine. "Full cooperation with the investigation, in exchange for reduced charges." "Testimony about what exactly?" Gerald asked. "Everything. The planning, the purchase of materials, his knowledge of her previous marriages." Quinn spread his hands. Tiffany was the instrument, but Marcus was a willing participant from the beginning. He knew his parents were being poisoned. He chose to do nothing. I felt sick. Not from any vase this time, just from the weight of hearing it spoken aloud, officially, in a lawyer's conference room. "We'll present that to the prosecution," Gerald said neutrally. "But I wouldn't count on significant leniency. Your client has quite the history." The prosecution wasn't interested in deals. They had enough evidence to bury both Tiffany and Marcus without anyone's cooperation. Russell Chen's investigation had linked Tiffany to her previous identities, and the families of Robert Henley and Daniel Vance were now cooperating with authorities in California and Nevada. But Marcus we couldn't ignore. He called from jail 3 days after his arrest. I almost didn't answer. Harold was in his workshop working on the Mustang for the first time in months, and the phone rang in the kitchen where I was making tea. "Mum?" His voice was small, broken. "Mum, I need to talk to you." "Then talk." "I'm so sorry. I didn't understand what she was doing at first. By the time I realized, I was scared, Mum. She said if I told anyone, she'd make it look like it was my idea. She had everything planned out. She said she'd destroy me." I gripped the phone so hard my fingers ached. "You could have come to us, Marcus. You could have told us the truth." I know I should have. I was weak. I was stupid." He was crying now, his breath hitching. "I let her convince me that you and Dad didn't really love me, that you only cared about your money, your house. She twisted everything until I didn't know what was real anymore." "And the loan? The $120,000 you borrowed against our deaths?" Silence. Then, that was her idea. She said it was just insurance, in case things went wrong with her plan. "In case we died slower than expected, you mean?" He didn't answer. I closed my eyes, remembering the baby I'd held in my arms 38 years ago, the toddler who'd clung to my legs when I dropped him at preschool, the teenager who'd asked me to teach him to dance before his first formal. "Marcus," I said quietly, "you need to understand something. Your father and I love you. We've always loved you. That's why this hurts so much. You had a choice. You could have walked away from her. You could have warned us. You chose not to." "I know," he whispered. "You're going to face consequences for that choice. We're not going to interfere with whatever the legal system decides." I took a breath. "But you're still our son. When this is over, if you've genuinely changed, if you've done the work, we'll talk." The next week brought more revelations. Tiffany, seeing that cooperation wasn't going to save her, decided to burn everything down. Her lawyer presented documents to the prosecution, emails, texts, financial records, all designed to shift as much blame onto Marcus as possible. But she made one critical mistake. In trying to destroy Marcus, she revealed something we hadn't known. She'd taken out a life insurance policy on him, $500,000 with herself as the sole beneficiary, purchased 6 months after their wedding. Detective Price called to tell us. "It looks like your son wasn't just her accomplice," she said. "He was her next target. After you were gone, after he inherited everything, she was planning to kill him too." I sat down slowly. Harold took the phone from my hand, finished the conversation, hung up. "He didn't know," I said, "about the insurance policy, about her plans for him." "No," Harold agreed. "He didn't." Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness. We were a long way from that. But maybe understanding. Marcus had been weak, selfish, willfully blind. But he'd also been manipulated by someone far more dangerous than any of us had realized. That evening I wrote him a letter. Just a few pages. Telling him what the police had found. Telling him that whatever happened next, he needed to get help. Real help. To understand how he'd let himself be controlled so completely. I mailed it the next morning. 3 days later, Marcus agreed to testify against Tiffany in exchange for reduced charges, not because of any deal offered, but because he finally understood what she really was. "She was going to kill me too," he told the prosecutors. "I want to make sure she never hurts anyone again."
The trial came faster than anyone expected. Tiffany's lawyer tried everything. Delays, motions to suppress evidence, claims of mental instability. None of it worked. The prosecution had too much. Video recordings, toxicology reports, financial documents, testimony from Russell Chen about her previous identities, statements from the families of Robert Henley and Daniel Vance. And they had Marcus. I sat in that courtroom every single day. Virginia beside me, watching as the woman who'd tried to poison us was systematically dismantled by the evidence we'd gathered. Tiffany tried to maintain her composure at first, sitting straight, wearing modest clothes her lawyer had probably picked out, trying to look like a victim herself, but the mask kept slipping. When the prosecution played the video of her adding more toxic beads to the vase, whispering about how we were taking too long to die, I watched her face go rigid. When Marcus took the stand and described how she'd manipulated him, convinced him that his parents were the enemy, that they only cared about money, I saw her hands shake with barely contained rage. The moment I'll remember forever came during closing arguments. The prosecutor, a woman named Sarah Chen, stood before the jury and laid out Tiffany's pattern. 2 previous husbands dead under suspicious circumstances, followed by her marriage to Marcus with the clear intent of targeting his elderly parents. "This defendant," Chen said, pointing at Tiffany, "is not a wife. She's a predator. She identifies vulnerable targets. In this case, a loving couple who made the mistake of opening their home to their son and his new bride. She gains their trust, and then slowly, methodically, she poisons them. Not with a single dose that might be detected, but with a careful combination of chemicals designed to mimic natural illness. By the time anyone suspects anything, her victims are dead, and she's collecting their assets." I glanced at Virginia. She was watching Tiffany, her nurse's eyes cataloging every twitch, every sign of the monster beneath the surface. "But this time," Chen continued, "she made a mistake. She underestimated Harold and Virginia Coleman. She thought they were, in her own words, too old and too stupid to figure out what was happening. She was wrong. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, fraud. When the verdict was read, Tiffany screamed. Actually screamed, a raw, ugly sound that echoed through the courtroom. She tried to lunge at Marcus, who was sitting in the witness section, and had to be restrained by 2 bailiffs. "You ruined everything," she shrieked. "You were supposed to keep your mouth shut. We could have had everything." I stood up slowly, Virginia's hand in mine. Tiffany's wild eyes found us. "And you pathetic old fools, you should be dead. You should have died months ago." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd smiled at us across our dinner table, who'd complimented Virginia's cooking, who'd called me dad, and plotted our murders in the same breath. "Tiffany," I said, my voice carrying across the courtroom, "you forgot one thing about old fools. We've been around long enough to know a snake when we see one. We just wanted to make sure everyone else saw it too." The bailiffs dragged her out. The doors swung shut on her screaming. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, an older man with silver hair and no patience for theatrics, looked at Tiffany with undisguised contempt. "Ms. Walsh, and I'll use your real name, since the court has established that Tiffany Snyder was a fabrication, you have demonstrated a pattern of predatory behavior that spans nearly a decade and multiple states. You targeted vulnerable people for financial gain, and you did so with a cold-blooded efficiency that this court finds deeply disturbing." Tiffany sat motionless, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. "For the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, I sentence you to 15 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. For the additional charges of assault, conspiracy, and fraud, I sentence you to an additional 5 years, to be served consecutively." 20 years. She'd be over 50 when she got out, if she got out. After the sentencing, Marcus found me in the hallway. He looked older somehow, hollowed out by everything that had happened. "Dad," he said quietly, "I know I don't deserve to ask anything of you, but—" He swallowed hard. "Chris and Emily, they've been asking about their grandmother and grandfather. They don't understand why they haven't seen you. And I thought, maybe—" I looked at my son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the man who'd let his wife poison me. "The kids didn't do anything wrong," I said finally. "They shouldn't suffer for your choices." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Does that mean—" "It means we'll talk about it. Virginia and me. Together." I turned to walk away, then stopped. "Marcus, you're getting help. Real help? Twice a week, a therapist who specializes in—" He paused. "In people who've been manipulated, controlled. Good, keep going.
The weeks after the sentencing were quiet. A good quiet. The kind that comes after a storm passes and you're still standing. Tiffany was processed into the state prison system. Her real estate license was revoked permanently after investigators discovered she'd been running scams on elderly clients for years, inflating appraisals, skimming commissions, steering vulnerable homeowners toward predatory loans. 3 separate civil suits were filed against her by former clients. She'd be paying restitution for the rest of her life. Marcus received his sentence a month later. 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory therapy. The judge made it clear that his cooperation with the prosecution and his status as one of Tiffany's intended victims were the only reasons he wasn't going to prison. He moved into a small apartment across town. We didn't see him often, but he called every Sunday. Short conversations at first, awkward and stilted, but over time they grew longer, more honest. The first time he brought Chris and Emily to visit, I nearly broke down. They burst through the front door like they used to before everything happened. Chris tall for his age now, Emily with her mother Megan's smile. They hugged Harold and me like they'd been starving for it, and maybe they had been. "Grandma, can we make cookies?" Emily asked, her eyes bright. "Like we used to." "Of course, sweetheart." I held her close, breathing in the smell of her shampoo. "Like we used to." Harold took Chris to the workshop to see the Mustang. I heard them through the open window, Chris asking questions, Harold explaining about carburetors and timing belts, their voices carrying the easy rhythm of family. Marcus stood in the doorway watching. He looked like he wanted to cry. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting them come. They're our grandchildren, Marcus. That never changed." I paused. "You're the one who changed. You're the one who has to earn your way back." "I know." He nodded slowly. "I'm trying, Mum. Every day I'm trying." The trust we'd established and the one that protected our house and savings for Chris and Emily remained in place. Gerald Martinez had structured it carefully. The kids would inherit everything when they turned 25, with provisions for education and emergencies before then. Marcus had no claim on any of it. He didn't argue. He didn't even ask. "It's better this way," he told us once. "I don't deserve anything from you. And this way, I know the kids will be taken care of, no matter what." The Mustang was finally finished in early autumn. Harold had been working on it for 4 years, but the last pieces came together in a rush of activity after the trial ended. New upholstery, a rebuilt transmission, fresh cherry red paint that gleamed like liquid fire in the Texas sun. The day he started the engine for the first time, I was there. The V8 roared to life, a sound that seemed to shake the walls of the workshop, and Harold's face lit up with pure, uncomplicated joy. "She runs," he said, almost laughing. "After everything, she runs." "Of course she does," I said. "You never gave up on her." He looked at me then, and I knew he wasn't just talking about the car. "I never gave up on us either," he said. "Not for a second." We took our first drive that evening, as the sun was setting over the Texas hills. The Mustang handled like a dream, smooth and powerful, the engine purring beneath us. Harold drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. 44 years of marriage had taught us that some moments don't need words. The wind in our hair, the orange sky stretched out before us, the road unwinding toward the horizon. It was enough. More than enough. I thought about everything we'd survived. 6 months of being slowly poisoned by someone we'd welcomed into our home. The betrayal of our own son. The fear, the anger, the careful planning. The moment when Harold had looked Tiffany in the eye and told her exactly what we'd done to catch her. We'd been tested in ways I never imagined. And we'd come through it together. Just like we'd come through everything else in our lives. Harold pulled over at a lookout point where we could see the whole valley spread out below us. The lights of Austin were starting to flicker on in the distance. "Virginia," he said, turning to me with that smile I'd fallen in love with 44 years ago. I have to say, for a couple of old fools, we did pretty well. I laughed. For the first time in months, I really laughed. We're not fools, Harold. We never were. I squeezed his hand. We're survivors. And we're still here. Still here, he agreed. Together. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below us, the city lights sparkled like earthbound stars. We sat there for a long time, watching the day end and the night begin. An old couple in a classic car, holding hands as the world turned around us. Some people think the best revenge is destroying your enemies. But I've learned something different. The best revenge is living well, living fully, living together with the person you love, long after those who tried to hurt you have been forgotten. Harold started the engine again, and we pulled back onto the road, heading home, where the roses were blooming in the garden I'd planted, where the workshop held a dozen restored clocks and one beautiful Mustang, where our grandchildren would visit next weekend, filling the rooms with laughter. We drove into the gathering dusk, two people who'd walked through fire and emerged on the other side, not unscathed. We had our scars, but whole, together, alive. And that was the only victory that truly mattered.
If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.